Good
Buenas tardes,
afternoon, good evening,
buenas
good
noches,
morning,
buenos
wherever
días,
you
donde
find
quiera
yourselves
que se
in.
encuentren.
We are
Nos da mucho
very happy
gusto
to have this
tener esta
conversation
conversación el
today,
día de hoy,
a
una
conversation
conversación
that's
muy
very important
importante
and
y
necessary,
necesaria, que se
titled
titula Las
Narratives
narrativas
of
del
Power,
poder,
Political
comunicación
Communication
política tras
after the
las
elections in
elecciones
Colombia.
en Colombia.
Well, Colombia
Colombia está
is
enfrentando
just
una
experienced
semana
a very
particularmente
difficult week.
difícil. La
The
semana
week
de un
of a
nuevo
new
gobierno,
government, but
pero
also
además
of a
de un
country that's
país
affected
afectado por
by an
un
earthquake that, without
terremoto
a
que sin
doubt,
duda está
is
poniendo
putting to
a
test
prueba
many of
muchas de
the
las capacidades
capabilities
del
of
nuevo
the new
gobierno
government.
y
And we're
también estamos
also
viendo cómo
seeing how the
la
narrative
narrativa que
created
creó
by
esta
this
candidatura ahora
candidate who
con
is
él
now in
también
power
lo
also
atrapa
traps it in the same
en la misma
response.
respuesta.
To have
Para
this
tener esta
very important
importantísima conversación
conversation
que está
that is
íntimamente
closely
relacionada con el
tied to the
escudo de las
Shield of
Américas,
Americas, we
tenemos
have
realmente
two
dos
guests
invitados de
of
lujo
honor,
y
and we are
estamos muy,
very
muy
lucky to
afortunados de
be
estar el
with
día
them
de
here
hoy aquí
today.
con ellos.
First,
Primero
we have
es
the
el
journalist
periodista
Jose Luis
José Luis
Sanz,
Sanz, un
a
conocido para
somebody
todos
known
los que
for everybody who
participan en los
participates
eventos
in
de
the events
Alianza
of Alianza
Américas, un
Americas,
periodista con
somebody
mucha
with a lot of
experiencia que nos ha
experience who has
acompañado en esta
accompanied
serie
in
sobre
this series
el
regarding
escudo de
the
las
Shield of
Américas,
Americas,
que
who
conozca
really knows the
íntimamente la región
region
y
and also
también la
the
relación
relationship
que
that the
tiene
United
Estados
States has
Unidos
with
con
Latin
América
America.
Latina. Así que
So it is
es
a
un privilegio que
privilege
José
that
Luis
Jose Luis can
nos
accompany
acompañe para
us
moderar
to
esta
moderate this
sesión
meeting,
y
and we
tenemos un
have a
invitado
guest
que
that we are
realmente
very
estamos
grateful
muy
to
agradecidos con
have
Omar
Omar
Rincón
Rincón here
por
to
estar
be with
hoy
us
con
today,
nosotros. Él es un
teacher
profesor, un
and
investigador,
researcher,
un
and a
ensayista y crítico
Colombian critic
colombiano
specialized
especializado en las culturas
in
del
entertainment,
entretenimiento, la
communication, and
comunicación y la política.
politics. He's a teacher
Profesor de
of
la
the Los
Universidad de los
Andes
Andes, mi
University,
universidad, así que me da
so it
mucho
is a
gusto
pleasure to have him
tenerlo aquí.
here.
Y es
And he's a
colaborador habitual de
regular
Medios por la Tierra,
collaborator
la
of this
revista Cero
magazine
Setenta y
Zero
la revista
70 and
Anfibia,
Amphibia,
donde
where he
publicó
published
un
a
ensayo
rehearsal
que
that I
yo
want
quiero
to
aprovechar para
suggest
recomendar, que se
called
llama El
The
triunfo
Triumph
del
of
yopitalismo.
Yopitalism.
Así
So
que,
without
sin más,
further ado,
muchísimas
thank you very
gracias a
much
los dos
for
por estar
being here
aquí el
today.
día de hoy.
And I
Y
want to
quiero recordar a
remind
la
the
audiencia
audience
que
that we have
tenemos
interpretation.
interpretación. Por
Please
favor,
click
marquen
the
el
globe
globo y el
icon
icono de inglés
and
si
choose
desea
English if that's what you
traducirlo.
need.
I just want to make a brief announcement that I should have made at the beginning. Welcome. Thank you for everyone for being here. We have Jose Luis Sanz and Omar Rincón, who's a professor, a researcher, and a critic. He's from Colombia. He's specialized in entertainment culture, communication, and politics. He's a professor of Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. He has a very famous essay that's the triumph of Yopitalismo, which I would not dare to try to translate into English. And so we're really looking forward to this conversation. Please use the interpretation icon, the globe, and choose the language so that you feel comfortable in this session today. Thank you very much, Jose Luis. Thank you very much, Omar Rincon, for being here. This really and truly it's a pleasure. We need to continue to understand the deep layers of the relationship between the US and Latin America, and it's very valuable to have this conversation today. Jose Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elena and Alianza Americas, for the invitation and for convening this series of conversations around the Shield of the Americas, but especially but as a way to reflect on the current political context, not only the relationship between the United States and Latin America, but also how they're building transborder narratives and in some cases global narratives that are promoting certain logics, certain, let's say, certain political narrative that in the case of Latin America is deeply marked by the narrative of the fight against drug trafficking promoted by the United States and logically through obviously Colombia as well, because it is a person that I admire and care for a lot. And it's fantastic to be able to have this conversation with Omar. Omar, it is a pleasure to see you. I'm also going to begin by sending a virtual strong hug to Colombia during these very difficult times in Colombia. I know that you're in Cali, but also either way, I want to send you a strong hug. Hello, Jose
Hola
Luis.
José
Thank
Luis,
you
muchas
very much
gracias
to
a
Alianza
Alianza
Americas
por
for
invitarme y
inviting me
pensar
and for thinking that
profundamente
I
en
can
Colombia.
capable of saying something
Colombia en este
interesting.
momento
Colombia, we
está
are
en el centro de la
currently in the
noticia en el
headlines
sentido
because of
del
the
terremoto que
earthquake
hubo
that took place. And
y
we
estamos en esa.
are, what
Y
you
de eso que tú
mentioned, for
hablabas, por ejemplo,
example,
el nuevo
I
presidente
not
solo
only
recibió
didn't receive not
ayuda
only quote unquote
humanitaria
humanitarian aid of
de los países amigos de
those
Colombia, porque es
so-called
una parte del Shield de
friendly
las Américas,
countries of the Shield of Americas,
El
Ecuador, El
Salvador,
Salvador, and Chile, and the
Chile
United
y Estados
States.
Unidos.
So
Entonces,
it's
estos
as
tres
if
países
the
no tienen ni
other
idea
countries
de qué
have
está
no
pasando.
idea what it has to do with rescuing people,
Personas
and
que
as
no
if they don't
tienen
have
ninguna
any
experiencia, que no tienen
experience
ninguna ciencia
or
oficial. Estos cuatro países no
any contribution.
merecen
These
en ese
four
tipo de
pioneer
cosas, lo cual
countries
es
in
como un
these
poco raro,
things, which
algo como
was
una
a
especie de
sort, it
debate,
was
porque
weird. There was a sort of a
se debate, pero
debate
mientras
because
haya
there are
gente
people
muriendo, lo
dying,
mismo que
and
como
just
está
like it
pasando
happened
en
in
México.
Mexico, it has
Ha sido
been
interesante es
interesting the
la gente,
reaction of the
la gente la
people.
que está haciendo el trabajo, la gente que está haciendo este tipo de cosas.
And there
No hay
isn't
una
a,
organización, no
they
hay
haven't
nadie
asked who
quien
they can
realmente
send
dé la
help
ayuda. Si
to,
cada cual está gestionando
and
la ayuda
they're sending
individualmente
the
por una cuenta bancaria
help
o SAPS o
via
algo por el
individually
estilo,
or a bank
no
account
hemos
or
hecho nada
WhatsApp. And
y
I
creo
think
que
that this
eso
is
es una prueba fehaciente cuando la
a
muerte no
very
importa,
recent example
cuando
because that
importa
shows
mucho
that
más
people are more
seguir en un
interested in sharing a
discurso que es
discourse where
como
they
el que
are
está gobernando, o
governing.
sea,
The
realmente
reality
a
is
quién
no longer
beneficia.
important
En
in
América
Latin
Latina creo que
America.
es
I think that the
el
fair that
asunto que nos
has us
importa.
here, what's
Lo real
real
no
is
importa,
not, doesn't matter.
importa
What
la, lo
matters are the
mediático,
narratives that we create
mediática y
either in the
tribunalmente
media
falsas.
or digitally regarding what we do. In that sense, and mentioning the tragedy of the earthquake, here what we have is a real emergency which is capitalized on, that is that they use as support to build a narrative in the case of drug trafficking of a permanent warning, and they base the reality on other things. So do you believe that what importance has there been for the arrival of Despierta to power in taking ownership of this narrative of a permanent emergency? For example, that where he's thinking outside of the box, as the Americans say, for a context that appears to surpass the institutional capacities. This is an expression of the triumph of this logic that we are currently in a permanent emergency. Yes, I
Yo creo
think
que
the
el tema
issue
del
regarding a
existe,
permanent
sí
emergency
existe
does
en todos
exist
los
in all
países, pero
countries, but
existe
exists
por
because of
razones
different
distintas.
reasons. I think that
Yo
in
creo que en Colombia
Colombia,
el
for
contexto para
this
que llegue este personaje
character to arrive has
tiene
to
que ver
do with
más
something
con
that
una
is
cosa que
repeated in
en América del
South
Sur, que
America, and you
podemos
can
analizar desde América Central,
analyze
América
all
del
of
Sur,
Central and South
y
America, and it
es
has to
con
do with this
un
feeling of
sentimiento,
or a sentiment that
que
is
se
built.
construye,
It
que tiene
comes
como
with
efectividad, que se
affectation
construye
against
contra un
an
enemigo
enemy, a
lejano.
villain, that in the
En el
case of
caso de El
El
Salvador,
Salvador, where you
tú has
have
estado
spent a
allí,
lot of time
pues
and you
trabajas
work
ahí con
along
ellos.
with them, the
Era
enemy,
muy
it was
claro que
clear that it
eran
was the
las maras
gangs.
y
And it's an enemy that it could be
fácilmente
easily
identificable,
unified,
pero
but
también estos
also the
partidos grandes
classic
como el Frente de
political
Liberación
parties like
Colombiana,
Arena,
que
FML, and
básicamente
each time
cada
there's
vez que hay algo que no
something
falla,
that
que falla en la
that
política de
there's an
Bukele, por
error
ejemplo,
or
son los
fault in
enemigos. En el caso de
Bukele's
Milei,
policy,
sus
he blames
cacas,
the
los
gangs,
sandinistas, está
and
como,
the same in other
una
countries
cosa
where it's something
que
that's
está
permanently
ahí y
there
que
that
funciona. En el caso
serves as a
de
way
Bolivia son
to
Evo
blame. Like
Morales
for
y
example,
otros, son los
in
enemigos
Bolivia
del
there's
gobierno
Evo
de los
Morales,
ecuatorianos,
and
que es
Ecuador
Correa.
there's
En el
Correa.
caso
And in
colombiano
case
es
of
Petro,
Colombia,
que
it was
realmente
Petro.
él gana
In reality, he wins
por un poco de
because of
gente
because of
no soporta
the
a
reason the
Petro.
current president won
¿Por
is
qué
because
razones no lo
people just
soportan?
didn't
Puede haber muchas
withstand
explicaciones.
Petro
La
anymore,
primera
and
es
for
que
some reasons.
Petro
One of them is
gobernó
that Petro
crispando,
governed by
problematizando y pegando
creating
con
chaos
Santos.
and problems
Entonces,
all the
cuando
time.
uno
So when
vive
you
pegando y
constantly
pegando, pues en un
live in
momento
this
dado
way and govern
la
this way,
emocionalidad puede
the
ir para el otro
emotions
lado
can shift
y logró
and you
tener una
create a
emocionalidad
lot
muy
of
fuerte. Petro
emotions.
perdió por
Petro lost by over
250.000
250
votos,
by
no fue mucho, por lo
250,000
cual
votes,
quiere decir que
which
sí era
means he
mucho
did have
mejor
a lot
gente
of support court, but
exasperó tanto a los otros que los
he
otros votaron
exhausted the
por
other
la
people
única razón
because
que votaron.
that's the only reason why they voted for the current
No, no,
president.
no hay
There is no
posibilidad
other
para
possibility to
explicarse ese tipo
explain this
de realidad.
perspective. This
Eso
would be
sería
the
como la
first
primera
thing that I
cosa que
would
yo diría
say
aquí,
that
que
it's
estos no
common in
deberían ser
Latin
candidatos
America
que se
where you vote
respondan
against
alguien,
something, a
una
figure
figura que
that
se
is
crea
created like a
común y
villain
corriente.
or the
El
demon.
nombre, ya como qué valores
So
le pongo,
what
yo les
words I
invito
use,
a
like for
descubrir las
example,
Américas
the
Chicas.
Shield of America, it's
Superhéroes,
supposed
ya
it's
son superhéroes,
superhero.
no
They're
son
not
héroes de
soap
telenovela
opera heroes, like
como
the
los clásicos
classic
que amaban
heroes
solo la
that
gente que no
love the
ama.
people. These are
Es
people
más,
that not only don't
desprecian al
like the
pueblo.
people, they
Entonces se
hate
convierten en
the people.
superhéroes
And
que van a luchar
these
contra esos
figures become these superheroes that will fight
depredadores
for and against
tradicionales
these villains, that they
que
ensure a lot of
aseguran mucho
things
también
with
el
the
sector popular, que
popular
no hay
sectors,
familia, la
the
patria,
people,
Dios, la
family,
seguridad,
God,
el
security.
statu
Let's
quo,
not
esto que hacen
interrupt
la
the
sombra,
status
el
quo.
sobrevivo.
So I
Pues
think
yo creo que
that the
ahí
Shield
sí
of
el futuro
Americas
de las
in this
Américas es
sense
más
is
que
more
una
of
guerra, como la que ustedes
a
crean, de
quote unquote,
seguridad,
it's
es una
more of a
guerra
symbolic
simbólica
battle to
para
determine that
determinar
nothing
quién hará
changes, that everything
cambios
is the
igual
same,
y
and we
tengamos
have the
los
classic
valores
established
clásicos establecidos
values,
ahí y
and
que no,
they
no
might,
funcionen.
and
Por lo
if it
tanto, es
doesn't
una
work,
batalla
it's a battle
contra los
against
derechos. O
rights.
sea, el
The
enemigo
enemy number
número
one, the
uno
public
de
enemy
todos los
number one
luchadores
of
también
everybody who
políticos de las
belongs to the
Américas
Shield of Americas
es una
is a
batalla
battle
contra los
against
derechos.
rights.
Sin los
Without
derechos
rights, they will
quedarían
be left
sin paz,
without
sin
any possibility
posibilidad
to
argumentativa
argument against or
o emocional. O
any
sea,
possibility to
sí,
feel
porque
this,
ellos lo
because the
único
only
que
thing
tienen
they
es
have
la patria de
is
Dios,
the
la patria
country
militarmente,
and
la
family
familia
and the status
y el
quo,
statu
that
quo. O
nothing
sea, sin nada a
changes for
cambio.
the
Entonces
rich to
ellos no
continue
quieren
being
ningún
rich and the
cambio.
poor to
Entonces,
continue
el
being
feminismo,
poor.
esto clásico
So the opposite
comunismo,
is seen
el
like
ambientalismo, el
communism,
comunismo,
migrants
y
are
yanquis
seen
como
as invaders,
invasores
as communist invaders,
comunistas
and
y hombres
everything that
totalmente
attempts against the
incapaces de pensamiento,
establishment
pues
works.
funciona.
So
Entonces
they
ellos vienen
arrive
a
to
defender eso
defend this and
y ellos se
against
vuelven
an enemy that's
personalizados
personalized
y
or
no
not.
son
So
superhéroes. Y
the
la mejor
metaphor
forma
of
de
the
superhéroes me gusta
superhero,
mucho
I
porque
like
es
this metaphor because
piensa en
think
los
about the
superhéroes, por ejemplo, en
American
películas de
superheroes in
Disney y
Hollywood
de
and
DreamWorks.
Disney movies. These
Son
are
gente que
people that,
para
in order to
salvar
save a
un mundo
child, they
destruyen todo
destroy
lo
New
material.
York. They
Que van,
destroy
rompen
buildings
edificios
just
y
to
entonces
save
van a
one
salvar el
child.
mundo.
That's the
Esa es la metáfora
metaphor
y la
that we
metáfora.
bought here. That's precisely what it's going to mention, and the ideas. It's brutal within this logic because it's how they normalize, and it's still tragic in the American movies and especially superhero movies. I always remember there's this Bruce Willis movie that begins with a terrorist attack where 300 people die in an airplane, but that's how he wipes out the terrorists. It's quote unquote a movie with a happy ending. So people forget about the 300 people that died in the airplane. What happens in the narrative of superheroes is the quote unquote collateral damage, the civil victims, they don't matter. You destroy the city, cars explode, people die, people disappear. You don't see this on screen, but they die, they disappear. But at the end, these are movies that we accept as as if they have a happy ending because this superhero wins and the villain dies. But citizens in general are just an extra, something in addition. And that happens with a political narrative that we're seeing right now. What
Lo que
happens,
pasa es
Jose Luis,
que
is that
desde
you
el
are
punto de
a
vista
journalist. I also
colombiano
work
de la
in
comunicación
journalism
y el
and
periodismo,
communications,
y es
is
que el
that
siglo
the
XXI
21st
es un siglo
century is a
donde
century
más
where
que
more
gobernar
than
o hacer
doing
política se
politics, you
comunica. O
communicate.
sea,
And this has
esto ha
been what
sido
has
lo que ha
defined
definido
this.
eso. Entonces,
I
yo me he
have
dedicado a usar
use
metáforas
political
políticas
metaphors since
desde el mundo
from the
de
popular
la cultura
cultural
popular
world, from the TV
televisiva.
world.
Entonces,
I used to say
yo
that
decía que
Latin America
América Latina
was
se
understood
entendía
more
más de la
from a
telenovela que de la
soap
parte
opera
política,
aspect than
porque
from a
era
political world, because
héroe puro
a
salva
pure
pueblo
hero
equivocado, mujer pura salva
saves the
mujer
wrong
equivocada,
people,
y
and
que entonces
this
eso fue
was
Néstor
basically
Kirchner
what we
en
were seeing
Argentina
in
y que lo salvaba de la
and
grúa
like for
y
example,
Lula
Lula
en
exited
Brasil que
Brazil and
salvaba a
he
un
saved
pueblo
people
de la
from
equivocación que
the
había
mistakes that they
cometido,
had
eso
made.
fue él, eso fue Correa, eso fue
Evo
AMLO en
left AMLO
México,
in Mexico,
Uribe en
Correa in
Colombia, países que
Ecuador.
no tienen nada de
So
eso,
somebody that
alguien que
actually
realmente
loves the
ama al pueblo,
people, literally they
literal,
love the
aman al pueblo, o
people.
sea,
If you don't
no ve
see,
a
if
AMLO en
not, look at
México,
AMLO in Mexico,
ama al
he
pueblo,
loves the
porque
people.
el tipo de
The
todo puede
that type
ser
of love might seem
tóxico,
toxic
pero
to us,
lo
but
ama.
he says he loves it.
Pero
But
la
the
variación que hubo en
variation
eso
in
fue con la
this
llegada de
century with
Trump,
the arrival
con la
of
llegada de
Trump and
Bukele, con la llegada
Bukele
de
and
Uribe, con la
Milei
llegada
and
de
these
muchos,
other guys is
es
that
que ellos dejan
They leave the soap opera narrative and they become a superhero that
yo
I
no los
don't
amo a
love
ustedes, pero
you,
ustedes
but
se
you
me
have to
restringen
follow
con
me
las
regardless
manos.
of what I
Y yo a
say.
ustedes los
I don't,
desprecio
I
porque les voy a
despise you, but
salvar.
I will
Y
save you.
eso
And to, for me to save you, you have
lo
to do
que yo
what
haga,
I say because you have to
confían en
trust
mí.
me and
Entonces,
trust what
¿cuál
I
ciudadano
do.
va a importar? ¿Cuál
So
sociedad va a
the society
importar si lo
won't
que
care as long as
el
what the
superhéroe hace
hero
es
does. This is
este
the path, and I'm
personaje es
successful.
exitoso?
So
Es
what
que
does
lo que
Trump
dice
say?
el
I'm
hombre,
rich
eso
and
es
I
lo que
love
llevan
money.
plata.
You're gonna
Usted va a
make
tener
money
plata porque
because
usted
I know how to
trabaja, tiene
make money.
plata,
But when
pero
it
el
comes to
derecho
human
humano,
rights
la
and
diversidad,
diversity
la
and
calidad, no,
equality,
eso no
that
importa.
doesn't
El
matter. The
mismo
same thing
Milei
with Milei.
anda
He
sacado
says
y
a lot
apología de
of
barbaridades,
incredible
asumiendo que él
things,
hizo
saying he
eso
was
y
successful and
que
that
eso
he
lo va
will
a
achieve the
lograr.
same
Y lo
thing.
mismo están
And the
haciendo
same
todos
thing
sus ministros
are being done
particulares.
by other things,
Asumen.
other
Ahí
people
hay
in
una
power.
cosa, José
There's
Luis,
something
para
else you have to
pensar
think about,
también.
Jose Luis.
Nosotros
We
tenemos
have
como
like
sabores
knowledge that's
casi
almost invariable. We
invariables. Por
think
ejemplo,
that
pensamos
the
que los
poor
pobres
people used
odiaban a los
to
ricos.
hate the rich people.
Parece que
It
los
seems that
pobres
the poor people
admiran a los
admire the
ricos y
rich
quieren
people
ser
and want
ricos.
to
O sea,
be like them.
cualquier
Any
migaja
breadcrumb of richness
de riqueza
might
puede
work.
ser.
So
Entonces, digamos que
that's
eso es
the
un
myth
poco
that
que
we used to
teníamos,
have, that it might seem
que
that
parecía que
that we
era por
thought it
ahí.
was
Claro.
true. In
Segundo,
second
pensamos
place,
que
we think that
la
the
cultura,
culture,
los cimientos,
knowledge, and
universidades,
the
la
universities and
clandestinidad,
United
la
Nations and the
organización
modern
parallela era un
organization
bien
was a
cultural de
common
toda
good for
sociedad.
all society,
Resulta
but
que no,
that's not the
que esto
reality. This
no le
is, they're
interesa
not
este
interested
tipo
in
de
these types
cosas.
of things.
Y
And third,
tercero, seguimos
we
hablando del mundo
keep talking about the world
multipolar.
between left
Hacemos,
and
creo que
right. And I
estamos
think we're
equivocados
wrong
porque
because in reality,
realmente el
the
poder del
triumph of
capitalismo es
capitalism is so
tan
strong
fuerte, que
that there's
solamente
only
hay una
one
hegemonía por
homogeny, that's
capitalismo. O sea,
capitalism. At the
el
end of the
mundo
day,
todos
we're
estamos
all
remando bajo la
consuming
misma.
capitalism.
Y
So the
entonces la
promise
promesa
of
de
these
estos muchachos
so-called
jóvenes es,
superheroes that
yo José Luis te
Jose
puedo
Luis, I
salvar,
can
tú eres
save you
suyo, que puede
and
ser
you can
poderoso,
be
salvable,
saved
porque
because
tú
you
puedes
can
ganar
become a
dinero
millionaire
como
like
yo. O sea,
me.
es una salvación
It's
individual dentro
individualism
del
within
capitalismo.
capitalism, and
Y el
capitalism has
capitalismo ha demostrado
historically
que
shown
aunque
that
no
it
tiene
doesn't have any
reglas,
rules,
es
which
como
is has
los
to do with
superhéroes.
superheroes. They've
Siempre nos han
always
vendido el
sold that
relato
narrative
de
that
que todos
everybody
los
who's a
superhéroes Jeff
millionaire,
Bezos, Cristiano
Bezos,
Ronaldo,
Cristiano Ronaldo, J
todo el
Balvin,
mundo que
whoever,
ponga,
they are
son
successful
exitosos
because
porque
they are
son individuos
individuals that have
que han logrado hacer
made
plata.
money.
Nunca
They've
hemos
never
preguntado el
talked
grupo,
about, we never asked
hemos
about the
preguntado el
method,
colectivo, el
the
común,
collective
de alguna
aspect.
forma no.
So
Nosotros
we
estamos
are just
jugando, ¿qué está
leftover in this.
pasando?
I
¿Qué está
mean,
pasando?
we are just cast
Las
aside. The
personas de Estados
people
Unidos
in
salen
the
jugando patrón,
United
todos
States,
jugamos,
they
toda la
don't
gente que
matter for
compra,
Trump.
él
That's all he cares
y
about
los
is
aliados que
himself and
sean,
the
estén
allies
un
with those who
poquito
are
en línea con
aligned
él,
with
porque
with his
inclusive
interest.
Trump
Trump
pelea
fights
con
with
Bezos, uno es
Bezos and
rico, se pelea
another
con el otro
rich
y
millionaire, and
afirma otros.
he
Yo creo
affirms
que
others. So I
eso
think
es
it's interesting
interesante de
to
mirar,
analyze this,
que
that the
las lecturas
classic
clásicas del
lectures
mundo
no
siguen persiguiendo.
longer valid in the 21st century.
Ahí
What
lo que
just
acabas
happened or
o
is
lo que está
happening in
pasando
Colombia when it comes to the
movimiento
political
político
shift or
colombiano,
political movement,
¿crees que
do
es una
you see a
expresión
similar
similar o forma
expression,
parte
or
de lo que
is it
vivimos
a
en
part of what we saw in
2016
2016 when
cuando se
they
votó
voted
no en el
no
plebiscito
in the popular vote to regarding
sobre
the
los
peace
acuerdos de paz?
treaty, or do you
¿O
think
crees
this
que esto es un
is a
fenómeno
completely
distinto?
different phenomenon?
Sé
They've
que no es
wanted
entrar en
to
el acuerdo de
focus,
paz
they wanted
total,
to
pero
center
es
the
distinto. O
peace
sea,
treaty on
yo creo
everything, but I
que
think it's different.
tú
If
sabes
you
muy
were to
bien
do
pues
a
que
survey
Colombia
in
no
Colombia,
entiende por qué la
99%
gente
of the people in
colombiana quiere
Colombia
la
want
paz.
peace. That
Eso no
has,
tiene
there's no doubt about
duda. Yo
that.
creo
I think it's
que es
different because
distinto
the
porque el país ya
country
maduró y pasó a otro
matured and
tipo
moved on to a
de
different type of
lógica.
logic.
Lo pueden
They can
usar
use it as a
exclusivamente, como digo
discourse
yo en
like
un
for
libro,
the
para sacar
guerrilla
tantos
soldiers,
votos
but that doesn't
en los
achieve as many
congresos. Yo
votes
creo
as
que
people think.
la, 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 la,
The
la
matrix
matriz
that
que
moved
movió
all of
esto
this is something
es
that
una cosa
happens
que
in
pasa en
all
otros países
countries in the
del
region.
mundo, y el
For
mundo, y
example,
también España y todo ese tipo de cosas,
is that it might
es que
seem
pareciera
that
que el
capitalism and
capitalismo
the
y las
current
sociedades actuales
societies
nos
are
estamos
being
sincerando
honest
con
with
lo que
what we
somos, porque es
truly
una
are.
forma de
That's
decir
an
algunos de
explanation that
nosotros
my
mismos como
Colombian
pueblo
colleagues don't
colombiano.
like.
Es que
It's
nosotros
not,
no éramos
we
tan
weren't that
demócratas, es
democratic.
que
It's
no
not that we
éramos tan
weren't that
modernos.
modern.
Eso es una
Martin
parte de lo
Barbero,
que
our
nuestro maestro dijo,
teacher, told us
América
that
Latina pasó
America moved
de
on
la
to pre-modernization to post-modernization without going through modernization. We didn't think about complex thinking or critical thinking. We didn't go through feminism. It's something to do with the elite. Human rights has to do with the elites as well. So in one way or another, we're being completely honest with what we are. So in reality, we are what's happening to us. The people in Argentina weren't as beautiful as they thought they were. They are very similar to Milei. Not all of them, but many of them are. Because if not, he wouldn't be there. The Americans aren't like Obama. Instead, they resemble Trump a lot. And we can see this on American TV all the time. All the presenters look like Trump, not like Obama. So that's a reflection of this. And in Colombia, we in the current moment, it might seem that the drug trafficker is governing or in power. If not, if if you look at the United States, you might think that the drug trafficker is in power in the United States. If you go to Argentina, the same. Why a drug trafficker? Because we see those things we criticized about drug traffickers. But as I've said other places, it's not the drug trafficker. Instead, that's capitalism. Is that it's what the drug trafficker was ahead of the capitalism, and they call this new money. If you go to Miami and you see the ceremony of new money, if I take a video of money, then you say this person is acting and dressing and behaving like a drug trafficker. They speak and exhibit themselves as a drug trafficker. They have the values of a drug trafficker, and they always say, I have money. Do you have money? Show me. Show me how much money you have for these type of things. So in one way, the triumph of new money is the triumph of the culture and taste of drug traffickers. That taste and culture for drug traffickers was taken, it lost its mask, and we are the new money. And this is what defines the entire world. The citizens that you mentioned are just leftovers, but we also the culture with a paparazzi. Who cares about a book, a piece of art? Who cares about critical thinking? Who wants journalism to be informed? That no longer exists. This modern thing, we've lost this. So we are being honest with ourselves. And there are exceptions like you and us, and there are some illustrated elite. We used to think that we were different. So we are worried because we didn't know that we were this ugly. I hear you, and besides the questions that I had, more questions come to mind, but I'm going to focus on this one, the one that's begging to be said or expressed. I understand what you're saying because in the having been in the United States in these last years, and it's repeated a lot whenever there's a tragedy, a massacre, there's a brutality, whether it's because of politics or violence. There's this phrase they repeat that this is not who we are. When in reality, the reflection, what we're seeing in the United States from a certain distance and without that naive perspective and that reflecting perspective, we ourselves in our own countries, the same thing we see. So what I think is more interesting, what you're saying is that we are being more honest with what we are, is that when we speak or when we think about how to respond to this, that normally, especially those of us who work in communication and we talk about democracy and fighting against authoritarianism, at least from this communication bias, which is the focus right now as well, is that we think that what's happening, it's not a problem regarding tools, it's a problem of investment capacity, a problem with time because we arrive late, because when they built these communication structures and ideological and language and very strong narratives, what happens is that with journalism, we're falling behind when it comes to tools and formats and whatever. But what you're saying is that there's an even more serious problem, is that we have a problem with our reality. The progressive discourse or the pro-democracy discourse has a problem with reality. Yes, of course. And the
Claro, y es
problem that
que
we
el
have
problema
is
que
how
tenemos
we're
es terrible
reading
por
reality. The
para
problem
mí el
was
problema
that
fue
we
que
spent
nos
so
dedicamos tanto
much
tiempo
time
a la lucha
on
por los sentimientos,
fighting that
que la
we
ganamos.
on our
Yo creo, yo
senses.
estoy
I'm
seguro que
sure that we
todos
won.
los que nos
Those of us
creemos
who
medianamente
consider
progres,
ourselves relatively
yo sabes que
progressive, I
no
don't
sé qué
know. The
tanto
other people
tú
say,
seas
I don't know how
progresivo.
progressive,
Yo
but
en el fondo
I'd
soy
say
un
I'm
hombre
a
de derecha.
right-leaning progressive because
Soy
I'm
feminista,
feminist and
ambientalista, ecologista,
pro-environment and
¿vale? Pero
pro-human rights.
en lo
But
económico no es que
money-wise,
haga
it's not like
mucho
I'm
por
earning that
cambiar.
much. The
Lo
most I
máximo que
make
hago es
is make
aprovechar
the
el
most of my
privilegio que
privilege to
tengo,
make this
pero así
criticism,
como de
but
izquierda,
being left-leaning,
pero mi
but
suegra me
my
llama
mother-in-law
guerrillero,
calls me
¿ya?
a
¿Entiende?
guerrilla fighter
Porque
just
el
because I think
socialismo, y eso
critically.
ya me hace
But
creer. Pero
that's
bueno, es una
a
discusión
discussion to
para
have
volver.
another time. But
Entonces,
so
nosotros ganamos
we
los
won in a
estudios,
certain sense. We
tenemos
have
un
the world
memorando de las
speaking about the
provocations.
gender
Eso
agenda.
no
This
pasa
has
hace
not
20
happened
años.
20 years ago. That was
Paramos.
a victory. The
Tenemos al
world is
mundo
talking
hablando
about
de
the
la sociedad
environmental
abierta.
agenda.
Eso no
That didn't
pasaba
happen
hace
20
20
years
años.
ago. We
Tenemos
have people
hablando al
talking
mundo
about
de migración.
migration.
El
The
mundial
World Cup
fútbol que
that
acaba de
just
pasar
ended,
tenía que hablar hasta
they
los
everybody,
periodistas periodistas
even
deportivos que no
those
piensan, hablaban de
ignorant
migración.
journalists
Tenemos al
talked
mundo
about
entero
migration. We have the
hablando de
world talking
libertades
about
sexuales.
sexual
El
diversity.
mundial
In the
parece que
World
estuvo
Cup, there was
atravesado por un
also this
discurso de
discourse regarding gender
libertad
and
sexual. O
sexual
sea, tuvimos
diversity,
derechos
human
humanos, de
rights,
derechos humanos.
workers' rights. We have the
Seguimos el
world
mundo
talking
hablando de eso.
about this. So
Entonces,
Trump,
Trump,
Milei,
Milei,
the
extrema
Colombia
derecha,
President Bukele,
van contra eso.
they
Tenemos que
go to
destruirlos.
destroy
Tenemos
this,
que
but they
destruirlos
can't
porque
destroy them
si esos
because
derechos
if they
no
weren't
tendrían
rights, they wouldn't
discurso.
have
Entonces,
resources.
tienen que
They have to
pelear contra
fight
eso porque
this.
hay
They
gente
have to
que
fight against
ganamos
this
sentido.
in order to
Pero lo
maintain
que
the discourse.
perdimos
But
fue
what
los
we lost is
sentimientos.
common
Nunca
sense.
fuimos
We were
capaces de
never
bajar
capable to
a los sentidos
lower
comunes.
people to
Y
common sense,
ahí
and we
creo que
have a
tenemos un
problem
problema.
there. We are
Victoriosos fuimos con
triumphant in the
en las
concept and
ideas,
ideas, but
pero perdedores
losers
en el
in trying
económico con los sentidos comunes.
to focus
Y
on
ahí es donde la
common
gran falla.
sense.
No
We
fuimos
weren't
capaces
capable of
de
explaining
explicar por qué
why
hace la vida más
making
digna
a
a una
life
mujer
more
popular
dignified
el feminismo.
for
No le
feminism,
fuimos
makes a
capaces
life
de
more
explicar por
dignified for
qué
a
hace la vida
woman,
más bella
to
a una
explain
mujer
to a
popular,
popular
a
man
una mujer
or a
popular
woman,
el medio
speaking about
ambiente,
like
la
the
diversidad
environment,
sexual.
sexual diversity,
Entonces,
human
no,
rights.
¿por qué?
Why
¿Por qué te
will
vas
it
a
make your
casar
life
con un
happier
infeliz?
if the only thing
No
that
porque
makes
te
your
vas a
life
casar, uno
happier is
prefiere
to
que su
have
hijo sea
some money, to
una
have a
persona con
home, a
casa, carro
car, and to go
ir
on
de
vacation
vacaciones,
and to get
emborracharse un
drunk
fin
during
de
the
semana?
weekends?
Eso es lo
That's
que
all they
necesita, o
need
sea,
to be
para ser
happy.
feliz.
So we
No
weren't
fuimos
capable
capaces, en
in
el
the
caso de
case
los
that has us
demócratas,
both
dos,
here. We weren't
no fuimos
capable
capaces de bajar el valor de la
to
libertad
lower,
por fuera
to
abajo.
ground the issue
Y
regarding
ahora,
human
¿quién
rights.
la
But
bajó?
who
La bajó
did this?
Zuckerberg
They
diciendo,
said,
diga
say
lo que se
whatever
les
you
diga
want
la
to
gana
say, and
y
Elon Musk would say,
diga
say
lo que
whatever you
diga,
want.
que son
This
un pobre
is
facho, que son una cosa
fascist
económica,
and
eso
this
es
is a
libertad.
troglodyte.
Y
And they
nosotros
say
dijimos,
this is
no,
freedom
no,
of
no,
expression. And we were
¿en
saying,
qué
no, you
criterio
can't.
moral va
What
la
moral
tolerancia? Si
criteria
yo
do I
tengo mi
have to
libertad de
tell them that
expresión, que
it's
él
not a
diga lo que
human right
quiera.
to say whatever
Y
they
no es que hay
want?
unas normas
It
de
has to do
respeto
with
que la
respect because
UNESCO
UNESCO, who cares
impone,
about
pero de alguna
UNESCO?
forma
In one way or
creo
another,
que
the
la
moral
superioridad moral
superiority
la
that we used
tenemos
to
nosotros
have,
y seguimos
and
viendo
we're
que el mundo es
seeing
diferente
that
a
moral
nosotros.
superiority in the
Esa
world,
superioridad moral
this
nos
prevents us
impide
from to
aceptar
getting closer and
quizás el
thinking that the
problema que
problem has to do
también
with tools.
yo
I
creo que
don't
no
think
me
the
sale
problem
del
has to do with
periodismo
tools.
decir
Like the
tengo
problem with
periodismo y
journalism
todo el
is not
periodismo
about
entiendo.
tools. The
El
problem
problema
is
es de
knowing how
saber
to connect with
conectar con la sociedad
society,
y ahí es
and
donde
this is
estamos
where we're
mucho
having
trabajo.
problems.
¿Qué
What
hizo
did
la
the
derecha muy
right-leaning
bien
movement did
desde
really
pasando por
well?
Estados
All the way
Unidos?
down from
Todo
the
el
United States,
movimiento
the entire
cristiano
Christian
de volver a
movement,
Dios
going back to God, assumed
asumió lo que
what
antes tenía
the
la teología de la corrección.
liberation
Porque
theologies do
antes en
have.
América
Latin
Latina no se
America, the
podía.
20th century, what the
Hicieron los
priests used to
curas, que
do,
eran
who used to be
progres,
progressive,
que fue la
which was
teología
a
de liberación que
liberation
decía
theology,
que los
saying that the
pueblos, los
people, the
sectores
popular
populares
sectors that
organizados
were
con
collectively
cultura, con
organized with
conciencia,
conscience could be
podrían ser
happier
libres.
because of
Eso fue
everything
lo
that
que
I
dijo.
said. These people
Esta
said,
gente dijo,
no,
no,
we're going to
vamos a hacer
do
lo que Pablo Semán
what
llama
Paulo Semán says,
teología de
the
la
prosperity
prosperidad, que es que
theology,
Dios
that
te quiere
God wants you
prosperar,
to
pero
prosper individually,
individualmente,
not
no
with somebody
colectivamente.
else.
Y las
And the
iglesias
Christian
cristianas están
churches in
mirando
Brazil are
en este
currently
momento
debating, they're going to
a
the
las favelas y
favelas
a
and
los barrios
neighborhoods to
organizar
electorally organize with criteria regarding the popular.
acogen
They
a la
they
gente de
collect
esa
the people, they
nación,
give them hugs, they listen to
escuchan,
them,
les
they
dan
share their
confianza,
trust,
les
they
dan
give them
amistad,
friendship,
les
they
dan
organize
estabilidad, les
parties,
dan
they give
una
security.
seguridad.
The
Los
progressive
partidos
parties in Latin
progresistas después se
America
volvieron
became
partidos de coloniales,
colonial
de
parties, post-feminist
postfeministas, de
parties,
una
and a
cantidad de
lot of
terminología,
terms
se
they
alejaron de lo
drifted away
popular
from what
y
was
en esa
popular
medida
and
quieren
they claim
representar
to
lo popular,
represent
pero
what's
no
popular, but
entendiendo
we
que
don't
no están
understand where
haciendo
the
lo
sense of
popular.
being popular is. And
Termino
I'm
con
going
una
to wrap
cosa
up
de esto
with
de ser
something
muy popular
regarding common sense to
para hacerlo
speak
más
more
claro.
clearly.
A mí en el 20
A
pasó
light went off
como tres
when
cosas así rapidísimas, tres
three
historietas que
I
me
saw three
pasaron.
stories.
Una,
First, they
preguntándole
asked the
a una
person
persona
how
cómo
they
los artistas
distributed the
ganaron 20
minimum
millones
wage. They
y le
asked, and he
preguntaron
said,
eso y él dijo, con
contrary to
entrar en
what I would
fotografía yo,
do,
contrario
contrary
con
to what
estar en
everybody would in
fotografía, en
theory
fotografía,
do,
él dijo,
the first
lo
thing is
primero que
what I
saco
take
es lo de
away
siempre.
is what I need for money. Then I
Después
survive with
el resto
everything
son
else. It
es
was very
importantísimo
popular.
ese
It's
concepto.
very important
Rito
in the popular
religioso, la
sector.
fiesta o la
They don't take
celebración,
into
eso es lo que
consideration
nos
going
importa.
to church. They
Queremos
always
lo
want you
otro
to
que
be
está
thinking.
interesante.
The second
Segunda
story,
historia,
Bogota is a
Bogotá es una
city
ciudad que
that
usa
uses
mucho la
the bike
ciclovía.
lanes a lot. So everybody, oh,
Fue
what a great
curioso, gran
city.
ciudad.
They
Preguntaba
ask people who
gente que
use
usa
the
la
bike
ciclovía y
lanes,
dice,
and they say, I
yo la
use
uso
it
porque cada
because
vez que voy de un
when
sitio
I
a otro me
see,
ahorro
when I
para
use
una
it, then I can save money to
no, no
purchase
es
a
por
beer, not
deporte,
for
la uso
exercise or for
porque
sports.
con eso
They
yo
do
al
it
medio
because
fin de
this way I will
semana
have
para
money
mi
left over
refresco.
to
O sea,
buy a
iba a
beer,
ser popular,
making it
re básico, pero
popular in
llegó de
that
todo.
sense.
Y
And
tercero,
third, in
ante
light of
este
this
lenguaje
horrible
asqueroso que
language
maneja el
used by the new
presidente de
Colombian president
Colombia,
or
a Milei,
Milei himself,
le
they
pregunté
asked
a los
us, the quote
estudiantes
unquote progressive
progres
students of
de
an
la
elite
Universidad de
university, they
Derecho,
asked teacher,
profe, ellos la
they
pasan
spend all
mamando
their
gallo.
time, quote
Ojo,
unquote,
mamando gallo
drinking.
en Colombia
It's
es
they don't
molestar.
take it,
Porque
they
sí,
don't
ellos no
it doesn't
significan lo que
mean what it
dicen.
literally says.
Y
And the
los periodistas
journalists
piensan
think
que los otros
that
tipos significan
they
todo lo
mean
contrario.
everything that they
Los
say. The
jóvenes se
young
dan cuenta que
people
lo que habla
realize that
Petro,
what
Milei,
Bukele and
Uribe,
Milei says,
no,
they say we don't have to take him
que es
seriously. They're
pura
just
bobada
speaking nonsense
para
to keep us entertained and keep us
mantenernos
having
entretenidos.
fun.
Y los
And journalists,
periodistas
we
tomamos
take
eso
this and
y
we try
tratamos de
to make
asignar
sense to
sentido a
something
algo
that
que no
doesn't
tiene
make sense,
sentido.
that it
Desde
doesn't make
dónde
sense
sí
from
tiene
its
sentido. Entonces
origin.
ahí
So one of
una de
my
mis
conclusions
conclusiones ha
has
sido,
obviously been,
obviamente,
and I do think
sí,
that if we were
si
to
nos transformamos
transform
esta bajada
going
de
down
sentido
to
común,
common
nosotros bajamos de
sense,
la superioridad
to the
moral
progressive moral
económica,
superiority, and to
intelectual
the
o
modern
ética, y bajamos al
intellectualism, and to
sentido
the
común,
common
no
sense, not
para
to go
irnos
to
al
the
barrio,
neighborhood, but to
para
just
entender
understand how
cómo
to
comunicarnos
communicate
con
with
los demás.
them. And if
Porque
we
si
don't
no
change the
cambiamos los
journalists,
periodistas,
there is no
no hay
solution. If
solución.
there's
Si no
no
hay cambio de
change in
periodistas,
journalism in Latin
en
America,
América
there's no
Latina no se
solution
puede, porque el
because
mundo está
the people
fascinado con
are
estos
people are just
señores.
fascinated by these people,
Sí,
by
porque
these
además
current presidents. Yes,
el
because
periodismo,
journalism,
incluso antes
including
de todo esto,
mm,
hubo
before
esta
this
crisis de
crisis that we're
legitimidad,
seeing
de crisis de
regarding
legitimidad, etcétera, etcétera, incluso
representation, before it
se
was
hiciera tan
so
palpable y alcanzara tal
manifest, we were
dimensión,
already
ya estábamos
fascinated
en
by
este
conflict.
conflicto.
Obviously,
Claro,
in
en
the
el
deep
fondo,
down, even if we may
no
not admit
admitamos
it, it
que
fits
las
in
aportaciones
with
son las
the
lógicas
society that we
de los
have
enemigos.
built,
Y
the
entonces el
perpetual
conflicto perpetuo,
conflict.
¿no?
There's
Porque
always an
siempre hay un
enemy,
enemigo
so
y
there's
se
always a
defiende el
scandal.
escándalo,
So
¿no?
effectively,
Efectivamente.
I agree that
Bueno,
this is
esto también
also
está detonando que
revealing who
somos
we
unos
are as
periodistas, ¿no?
journalists,
El
what have been our
estos
vices
estudios de
for a
desarrollo
long time
económico
now. And
y cómo
but
hacemos
Jose Luis,
Por
in
eso,
that
Luis,
sense, what you're
de eso
mentioning
que tú
right
estás
now,
hablando, yo estoy
I'm saying
diciendo
that
que
all the
fíjate que en
we
todos
in
los
all
países
countries
decimos
we
que el
say that
país
the
está
country's
dividido
divided
50-50
50-50,
y
that we
somos
are
polarizados en
polarized
eso.
or extremely divided.
Y
And
ese método
it's not
periodístico
that
que
the
uno tocaba mencionar
journalistic
siempre
method
sobre
that
la
we were
identificación,
taught that I could
que
not
uno podía
speak
hablar con los
with
antagónicos.
one side if I didn't speak
O
with
sea,
the other. Either I
o con
speak
los
with the people
buquelistas
with
o los
pro
anti-Bukele,
Bukele
pero
or
entre los
against the people
buquelistas y
against
anti-Bukeles
Bukele.
hay una
But there
ambigüedad
it's
que
so
nunca
there's
la
such a
soltamos.
divide that we
O
don't
hay
talk about it.
buquelistas o
Either there are
castristas, pero
people
entre la
pro
mitad hay una cantidad.
one president
El
or
no,
periodismo
no,
debe
y
narrar esa
dentro,
mitad ambigua.
and
y
within
dentro de
these
los
people
buquelistas y
pro
dentro de las matrices
Bukele, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of
castristas,
matrices, the same people
efectivamente,
within those
hemos
people
aburrido de
pro
partidos, o
Trump.
sea,
That
eso es
it's completely
totalmente
true. I
cierto,
think
y yo
that
creo que
we're
estamos siendo muy, muy poco
being not as
curiosos
curious as we should with this
tenemos un
matrix. We
periodismo
have
con muy poca
journalism
curiosidad
with
o al menos esa
little curiosity. That's my
es mi
opinion.
opinión.
Now,
Ahora,
I have
tengo
a
un par de
few
preguntas
questions from
de
the
los
participants. I'm
participantes de
going
la
to make
conversación
them
ahora, pero
now,
antes
but I
quiero
wanted
terminar un poquitín más
to
con esto que estamos
talk more
hablando,
about when we're speaking
hablando
about
de,
journalism. Do you
¿tú crees
believe
que
that the
esto generacional
generational relief
va a
will
servir de
serve for
algo
something in light of this
para esta
challenge
generación del
within
periodismo
journalism,
o
or
que
do you
sirve
think that
las
the
claves para que el
key
periodismo
for journalism to
reconecte hacia
reconnect
además
and be
hacia el otro
revitalized
lado, no en la
is
reproducción
impossible?
del
That
suyo?
the generational relief will not do anything at all?
Yo creo
I
que
think
sí,
that
pero eso tiene
journalism has
posibilidades
serious
como la
problems. For
pregunta
example, we
de
lost
dignidad. O
dignity.
sea,
I always
yo siempre
share
digo,
that
tú
in the
sabes, en
20th
el siglo XX
century,
nos han
everybody
robado
loved
dignidad,
us and
nos
respected us. You would go to immigration and the immigration authorities would say, just go on. Now, I was going to do a campaign where we were going to wear a t-shirt that said, I'm a journalist, that's it, nothing else. they're going to be beaten up in the street, so we lost our legitimacy. So we have to see how we earn it back, and we keep insisting on the key formula, how we're doing stories, narratives, and I think that good journalism is done a lot of the times, and there's excellent journalism like never before, but it's slow journalism. What we've lost is the breaking news journalism, where it informs immediately. We lost that sense. The other,
Y el periodismo local
maybe
también.
we've also lost local journalism, street level journalism that
Está
is
todos los días,
every day in the
todos los
same
días en la misma
street,
calle.
that
No te
doesn't
llega y
just arrive
visita una
to
vez al mes,
visit
sino no,
once in a
está
long
todos los días en la
time,
misma
like
calle, en el
visiting
mismo
the
barrio.
same street and neighborhood. We've lost that. So I think that there is a possibility for the new generations, but with new ways, new methods of training. I think that training or formation, we are training in the classic method. The journalism that we always see, they keep insisting that that is how journalism should be. I always say, forget Watergate, forget all these things, and let's try to do journalism that I call popular sovereignty, that are anchored in what's local, that journalism that looks like that community, that looks like that local aspect. It's journalism to win common sense. Obviously, we need to do journalism for the elite that will speak to the NGOs, to the university, to the elites. But for the popular, we need to recover the popular journalism, journalism that we find the beauty of new formats. For example, a student that they can tell a story as a musical, that a report can be done as a documentary, that for us to ground many things and see that we can do it. My joy is that I'm seeing young people that want to do journalism. That's a miracle to see young people wanting to be journalists, but we're not training or forming them well. When I give classes, I see that my colleagues keep insisting in continue reading the classic journalists, and the young people, they lose emotion because they say, or lose interest because they say, I don't want to do this, I want to do other types of things. So we have to reinvent another way of teaching or training people, and reinvent ways to reach people. We've done efforts, and there are wonderful efforts done one by one. And maybe the other thing we might have to do is just accept the fact that we were never massive. We were always had to do with the elites. Journalism was never massive or for a complete society. It works, but what I see it's more serious or more grave is that all Latin America, journalists are fighting amongst themselves. When they reach power, they say, "Oh, this journalist is good. This one's bad. This one is paid." So we're seeing a decadence in light of these elements that it does work. And finally, to be a bit more optimist, I think that, let's say journalism is doing badly, that it's attacked by Bukele, Despriela, attacked by Trump and Ortega, and they all say that we are worthless. So why do they attack us? If so many people hate us or don't respect us, it's because something within the journalism matrix upsets the power or makes the power uncomfortable. So we have to recover that passion for dissent, to disturb them, to upset them. If we didn't, they wouldn't attack us. Many times they attack us because we are useful to them. Let's say Petro or Despela sent a tweet and everybody talks about this, what's happening, and it's very crucial for maybe, and for example, Trump and the New York Times, is that these people, they say something really ridiculous and we speak about that, and suddenly we find out that they've sold all public companies, they sell a water company to the rich friends. But since they have us busy talking about something else, we are focusing on something instead of focusing on what we really should focus. Well, the thing is that we have to focus on what we really should be focusing on, where the realities that affect people are taking place. If we stay focused on that, they don't like this. And the second thing is to not take them seriously. We just, they shouldn't be portrayed as just
si los
as just
tomos
popular
como para
entertainment. If, oh, do you see how that person, his home was not combed well and he wasn't wearing a nice suit. If we criticize the things that they claim to do well, that's what it'll accept them. When what happens with Trump and humor, and that might be another alternative along that same path. As I
Tengo
mentioned, I have some
algunas
questions
preguntas
and
cada vez
more and
más.
more being
Voy a
added. I
hacer dos
think
que
I'm
creo que
gonna
están
ask two
vinculadas
questions that
y
are
sigo con
kind
las
of
dos.
linked. One of the
Uno,
participants that
afirma
they
que
said we're
se
talking
trata de
about a
levantar la moral
moral
general, pero
bankruptcy,
es
but
algo que
it's something we
consideramos también
consider inherent in our societies. And if so, how do we overcome this?
Y hay otra
And
pregunta
the
que
other
va un poco en la
thing, and it's the
misma,
same
en la
line of
misma
thinking,
línea, es reconocimiento que
acknowledging
la
that
noción de que las sociedades
Latin
latinoamericanas
American
nunca
societies
llegaron a desarrollar
never
una
developed a
república democrática.
democratic
¿Cuáles serían
culture.
las
What are
acciones
those
prácticas
practices
que
that
podrían
could
contribuir a la
contribute
reducción de la
to
realidad
overcoming
caótica
the
y autocrática
chaotic
que es
reality that
predominante
we
o
feel
incluso
is
inimaginable?
unbeatable or will never end?
Pues yo
I
creo
think
que
the
la
first thing
primera
that we
que yo
would
diría
say
es
is
bajar de la
to
superioridad moral
get rid
que
of a
tenemos
moral
en
superiority that we think
yo
that
por
we have.
naturaleza. ¿Cómo
I
lograr
ask
la
myself that
democracia?
question every
En
day.
Colombia las
In
elecciones
Colombia, the
fueron
elections were
decididas
decided by
y las
500,000
universidades
citizens
eran
that had a
superiores
moral
morales
superiority
a,
than the two
a las
things.
dos
They
cosas.
were
Eran
so
tan superiores que
superior,
no
they
se atrevían a mojarse
didn't
porque
dare get wet. They
moralmente
said,
no
I
podían
couldn't vote
votar
for this
ni
one
puedo
or
votar
that
allá
one because I
porque
just can't
no
vote for
puedo, no
either
me da.
candidate. And
Eso
that
decidió
decided,
irse un modelo
that
por otro
determined if there was
modelo.
going to be one
Cuando
model or the other,
la
where
realidad
the
política es muy
political
marginal,
reality does
no
not
pueden
allow you to have
discutir la
that
superioridad
moral
moral
high
porque
ground.
de
So
alguna manera
when it comes
a la
to this,
superioridad moral le falta
that's the
eso, lo
first part.
primero.
The second
Segundo,
thing is we have
tenemos
to
que volver a
narrate
narrar la
how
democracia.
or
Yo creo
talk
que
about what
en Colombia,
democracy
de
really
alguna
is.
forma, una definición de periodismo también
Definition
era el
as
narrador de la
journalism
democracia,
is
era el
that it's the
relator de la
narrator
democracia.
of democracy,
Pero
but we
nos
narrate the
narró
rights from
derechos
the
desde el punto de
perspective
vista de
of concepts,
conceptos,
and we
no le
didn't
pusimos
place a
relatos.
story or
Entonces no hay
narrative. So
relatos. Si yo le pregunto
I
acá
ask my
que
students,
digan
tell
nombres de
me,
derechos, dirán
name
cosas
the
como
rights.
derechos quién tiene
They
que
can't
votar
name them.
eso.
They have no
No hay un
idea. There isn't
relato
a
para eso.
narrative to talk
Yo creo
about
que
this. So in
de
one way or
alguna forma,
another, we
tanto que
repeat
hemos
it
dicho y
so often
crecemos
that we find a
buscamos
way
la manera de
to
narrar,
narrate. We haven't
no hemos sido
capable of
capaces de narrarlo.
narrating
El
it.
periodismo no es
Journalism
narrar
has narrated the
los
problems that
problemas que tiene la
democracy
democracia,
has,
pero no ha
but
sido
it
capaz
hasn't
de
been
narrar
capable of
lo que la
narrating what
democracia
democracy
tiene
has, what
de
the good
virtudes,
parts
no
of
han
it.
sido capaces.
The
Los
intellectuals have been
intelectuales hemos sido
capable
capaces de
of
crear
creating concepts,
conceptos,
theories
teorías
regarding
sobre la
democracy, but we
democracia. Hemos
haven't
sido
been able
capaces
to
de
tell
contarse
this
la
to my mother, for
normal. Hemos
example. We
sido
haven't been
capaces
able
de
to
bajarla
ground it to
y
actually
narrarla. Yo
narrate
creo
it.
que
That's my
esa es mi
obsession. The
obsesión.
answer is
Mi
that my
obsesión, mi
obsession has
obsesión
to
no
do
tiene
with
narrativa. Yo
narratives.
hoy
For
digo,
me,
para
we
mí nos están
are
ganando
beating us
en la
in the
manera de
way
narrar,
that
que no es
we
de la
narrate. It
manera,
has to do with
sino
the
es la
tools, instead
capacidad
with the
de
capacity
narrarla
to
con
tell
narrativa.
stories
De
in ways
formas
that
que que nos, que nos
generate
genere
hope and make
esperanza,
us
que nos dé
proud
fuerza y nos
and
energice.
gives us
País
energy.
el
70% of
70%
the world
del
doesn't
mundo
want
tiene
this reality
comodidad,
because
que
it's a
tiene pluralidad
reality that's
muy
very perverse,
perversa.
so they
Entonces
don't want
quieren
to be
informarse ya,
informed
entonces
anymore. So they
empiezan
just
a ver
go on
algo
onto
que no
social
solamente
media
es
and
buscar, es que no,
I also
hemos
want to have
descubierto
discourses
discursos
where I
donde
can
no me
find
esfuerzo.
myself, where I can
Yo
see
me
myself,
considero,
and I
creo que
don't
no
think we
estamos
are
narrando
narrating.
el, 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 el
We
concepto
haven't
humano
turned the
como los
concept
derechos
into a
humanos. Derechos
story.
humanos
Human rights
es en donde dice
feminism,
todo
when
esto cuando
you
lo vuelves
make this a
propia,
story,
es
it's no
comprensible.
longer
Cuando todo
understandable. But
el
it's the entire
concepto es
concept of the
la
fight
pelea entre los
between good
pueblos, es
people. You're going to
cuando
tell
la
a
pelea
very
de los
dumb
pobres.
story. I'm going to share a very dumb
Día,
story.
una
A
tía
person in
tenía
a
una
press
conferencia y
conference
habló de seguridad
talked about food
alimentaria. Y lo
security,
que
and
la persona que estaba
another
preguntando
panelist
le pegó
scolded
tres
this
años
person
porque
about
esa
why
persona era
this
militar y no metía
metaphor
la
about
soberanía
regarding
militar.
food security. And I
Entonces la persona
said,
dijo,
I
pero
raised my
¿cómo
hand
no
and
es
said,
una
you're
política de
speaking about the
progreso? La
same
pelea no es
thing.
por si la
It
palabra
doesn't have to,
soberanía dice
it's not if
mucha eso. Es que
sovereignty has
estamos
more to do
repitiendo
than
lo
security. We're
mismo.
speaking about the
Y
same
ese
thing.
tipo de
And those
peleas
types of
conceptuales y
minimalist and
morales de modo
conceptual battles
nos
has us
tienen
all
parados. La
messed up.
universidad está en
The
entredicho en
university
este
right
momento
now is at a
porque
crossroads right
los
now, and
profesores
we
no
don't do
hacemos
anything
nada
to
para
make it
volver lo
more
que estamos hablando.
friendly.
No,
We're
no
not.
estamos haciendo nada para que los estudiantes
I
digan,
want
quiero
I
entrar a
want to go
clase
into class
y ya.
and see it for
Yo, por
myself.
ejemplo,
For
ayer
example, I have a
tengo un
course
póster en
this
este computador
trimester that
que
makes me
es
happy. This
qué
quarter,
sociedades se
what
develan en los
society?
tiempos.
We're going to
Y
start
trabajamos
with
con
Britney
niños que
Spears. I didn't have to speak to the entire class, but after an hour and a half, the students talked about mental health, about the problem about politics and family, what it was like taking decisions, how difficult it was for a woman to be successful, why there wasn't a single theory in one of these they highlighted this, like we're also going to see the entire problem regarding race. So in one way or another, there are other ways to approach people and explain the same concepts. And once you believe the mystery, and it happened to you and me and everybody else, once you have that curiosity, you go and investigate on your own. I said the first class in which in about 3 years where nobody pulled out their cell phone during the entire class and everybody applauded at the end. Teacher, we left learning something useful because we have something to talk about with our friends. It was a lot of we talked about Taylor Swift, for example. We didn't talk about feminism and mistreating women and building a Disney model, a Disney type woman. It's an effort we have to take away our moral high ground. And it's not using the same thing that the right is using. We're gonna be more playful, we're gonna be ironic, we're gonna be more festive. We're going to show that enjoying our rights is something that brings us joy.
Además, es que nombres a Taylor Swift y hablar de Taylor Swift es hablar de poder.
We don't have to why to use the language of power
Y para nombrar a Taylor Swift, definirla, o sea,
when they want to
porque
develop
efectivamente
these
estamos hablando de
powers.
poderes.
I wanted to make a comment, like for example, I agree with you, Omar, 100% to see the concerns of the journalists. They would have to waive that position that they are more informed and they are smarter than everybody else. We are in agreement in that sense. There's the first question that was asked, and it has to do with the topic with journalism, but it's connected with just like everything else that we're talking about, narratives. The first question that I received during the conversation, what would be an expression or series of expressions because of this wild capitalism, including the ideological world. It's how to reconnect with the ideological background that this is included in all of this. I think that Latin America journalism has multiple examples to find practices that aren't this wild capitalism. For example, when I have discussions, they talk about techno-feudalism and capitalism, and I say, okay, I agree. All this exists academically speaking, but if I'm going to speak with people, you explain what is the popular survival of Argentina right now. How many stories have we heard about how these people are surviving in Argentina? They are surviving via capitalism, but in solidarity with fairs, with communities, with a cooperative model. There are multiple methods of survival because of this wild capitalism. However, journalism only talks about destruction. We're going to go to the Amazon, and once again, illegal mining activities, and that they're destroying the Amazon rainforest, and there are indigenous communities that have resisted and are resisting with different economies. I think that there are popular alternatives in light of these situations. And the other thing is that there are two examples that a person in Argentina was asked, how are you? What do you do? How do you survive? No, I have to find ways. Oh, everything is fine. As if they don't relate that he has to work with, that having to work more is unrelated to their problems. That what they do, there is no connection to our lives. We don't connect that type of situation, the situation of other people with our own experiences. So we have to narrate these other methods. We have to tell that person, but hey, don't you think that? But what can I do if that person is crazy? Let him be crazy. He's not going to respond beyond that. So I do think that in one way or another, we have to find that we are doing more things than we believe we are doing. That once again, Jose Luis, the world, it's not one or the other. There's a number of formulas in the case of migrants, under the current narrative that we create, every migrant is robbed, is raped. And there's still many migrants, so there has to be something there that's wonderful, maybe a passion for adventure, to wanting to reach their destination, to find sense in their life that they didn't used to have. I once spoke with a Honduran, and the guy had gone 3 times, and he said because it's fun. It's an epic journey. There are different meanings or senses for life. We don't understand what happens on the way there. They say, I know more about reality than you. And he's right. He crossed 7 countries. There are different stories we can share, but we only share one narrative that they are robbed and raped. Is that
Es que además
what
estamos,
you're
esto
saying
empieza
has
haciendo
a
progresión física y
very strong physical or narrative connection. The journalist narrative has no horizon. You're talking about this narrative that goes and is sent back. It might be more pragmatic or more based on one thing or another, but there is a horizon, and our narratives have too little of a horizon. And also with the technological ones, Bezos and Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, they invent these glasses and they grab some glasses and say, this is the future. They grab a cap and they say, this is the future. They take photographs with their glasses. This is the future. Is the future truly in an electronic device? And what does the young person say? What is missing from these young people is a is a human project, but we don't have that. But right now, neither the left nor the right have this, neither the progressive movement, nobody has it. The human project that we have that we progressive have is that everything is already messed up. Climate change is here, everything's a disaster, everything's a mess. In the left, they will talk about neoliberalism and etc. And what are we going to do about this? And what does the right say? They just say, good job. Let's just make money however you can. Kill whoever you want, but you will have money and buy 2 Teslas and you'll be happy. The social project that in my time was sold to me was nice because it was a society where the social project was to talk with our neighbors, to be together, to have fun at parties. So if you go to the popular sectors, what is the sense of future they have? Every party that they have, oh, the party to celebrate virgin, such virgin, we're going to have it. So they just want the parties to just have fun. It's temporary joy that does not go for the consumerism, what I call jopeaísmo. I make money and to show that I enjoy capitalism. In the popular movements, the money is used to have a party or to have fun, and that's something different. And to have food, of course, but food is a part of a party because food connects the community. So there's a battle between what's common and the collective and the individuals because sell it as something fun, something fascinating is easy. Who has a better time than being with people? The collectives it sells itself, and when we're together, we have a great time. I was hearing before, and I was thinking they might see, in a certain sense, what happens is that a lot of the progressive and journalist narrative is that they build on we talk about the crisis that this supposed superhero will save us later on. I want to wrap up because we're reaching the end with I want to wrap up with a question that complements really well what we're talking about, and it makes complete sense. Felipe Garcia Aris says that I agree with the need to build daily narratives of what happens in society. What value do you find in building these narratives, starting from stories for people that lived in the 20th century, that experienced dictatorships, like these narratives post the war? Should we insist on recalling what happened in the past, or do we need new narratives? And we have to build narratives that are less anchored in the past and more simply free from the past. What do you think? I think that my daughter-in-law, my stepdaughter told me, my stepdaughter, she said a relatively sexist comment, and I said, Omar, I'm up to here saying that what the women did. I'm already here. I want to see what's left, what's next for me. Not why do I have to go back 80 years to one second? I just want what's remaining for me from this point forward. And that's interesting. Do you remember the movie Another Chile when they voted no? They asked. The ones on the left, they wanted to vote for all the perversities done by Pinochet. And what won at the end was that they showed what would the world be like without Pinochet. And and what is it the world wins? What would the women win with their rights? What will people win having a good environment? Will people have having rights? The world with an environment has water. So let's make narratives regarding about water. What we all understand. I once asked chicas, and they said, "Convince me." Asking some women, "Convince me why I should be a feminist." And they said, "Oh, because it's nicer." I don't care about that. I'm a man, and I benefit from being a man. But one of them said, and then the rest of them agreed that they said all man that's a feminist enjoys better sex. And I said, "Wait, okay, I'm on. I agree with this. This allows me to become a feminist. Help me. I want better sex, so help me." So it's not that, let's not get rid of the past. Instead, let's turn them into ideas for the future. What Pope Francis and the new Pope, the old Mujica, they were all old people and they all had ideas for the future. They built ideas for the future, futures calm futures with peace. Pope Francis talked about peace and joy, what was young. The new Pope fighting with decency. They build possible futures. So we don't have to get rid or throw away the past, but a great virtue is like when you tell a story regarding science. Sometimes we don't have to tell what the scientists invented. Instead, the people tell about the story about the scientists, and people will find out what they invented. Because the scientist was fun, was a pop star, and then they will say, "Oh, it doesn't matter exactly what they invented. I build a presence." And in this sense, we are children of the Western narrative, but we buy it, we accept it. We want to buy stories that lead us to a happy ending. And it sounds sad, but all these stories that they sell me, that tell me how the world is doing badly, how the world is messed up. And when I say I don't want to go to, after seeing three documentaries about, I get sad, I get depressed, and I'm convinced why this documentary of military violence, why isn't it shown in the battalions? Why don't they show them to the soldiers? Show them this documentary that will realize what happened. I realize I don't like guns or weapons, but it's like it's speaking amongst ourselves so that everybody turns up being very knowledgeable. We can create more things, and I do think that a a a past that tells me the story about the future. It's not that a past just for this, like for example, El Salvador, the stories about the past about radio. It's an exciting story to share and to tell. There are stories that interesting story, but we are not interested, but not for journalists, not interesting for journalists or for NGOs, but selling a problem is apparently the source for to earn money in our business. But we leave a meeting where we complain about everything, and then we go to a great party, which is what journalists also want, to have fun. So in one way, it's like we're in two completely different and separate worlds. Omar, I'm going to finalize this meeting upset with Alianza Americas because they only gave us 1 hour. So it's not just me, but everybody else who's listening. And I'm sure that everybody else here would continue in this meeting for a long time. But time is running up. I always enjoy speaking with you. Let's talk again soon and creating new horizons. And I'm sending a great big hug online and thank you for this wonderful session and for not only for everything that you say, but also the freedom and joy with which you express yourself. So thank you. It's just as a like a balm for me. No, thank you, Jose Luis. And what I say that I love about all of this is that what I do is I make mistakes in public, but I do it with energy, knowing what we already say and console ourselves with what has to be fixed. And what I do is I make self-criticism regarding what's missing in Latin America. The problem is not about somebody else, it's our problem. We put Milei, Bukele, Despiela, and Trump in power. It wasn't other people. We let these people get to power. Hugs. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Alianza Americas, and greetings to everybody who has accompanied us today during this webinar. We're going to continue conspiring, thinking, and finding new paths. Thank you.
Gracias.